They told you weed makes you lazy, that it fogs your mind, kills your drive, and leaves you trapped in a haze of wasted time. For decades, this has been the story repeated in classrooms, on television screens, and across courtrooms. But what if that story was the biggest lie of all? What if the truth is that cannabis was never meant to dull you but to awaken you? Imagine for a moment that what we've been taught to laugh at or fear was once revered as sacred, that in the oldest temples, under starlight and silence, cannabis was used as a key, not to escape reality, but to unlock it. If that sounds impossible, it is only because someone worked very hard to bury the evidence. You are not just an observer, here you are the seeker, and the question before you is not whether cannabis can intoxicate, but whether it can initiate. Hidden in ancient scrolls and carved in temple walls lies the ritual of Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom, a practice designed not for amusement, but for transformation, a practice so powerful it was hidden, mistranslated, and mocked for thousands of years. Tonight, we will unearth it, and once you see the ritual for what it truly is, you may never look at the green messenger the same way again. They told you cannabis was nothing more than smoke in your lungs and haze in your head. They said it dulled your focus, robbed your ambition, and left you lost in fog. But what if the real story begins not in the streets of modern culture, but deep inside your own body? Hidden in the folds of your brain and nervous system is a network of locks, tiny receptors, waiting for one specific key. Strangely, that key does not come from a pharmacy, nor from the chemistry labs of the 20th century. It grows from the earth itself. Science now calls this network the endocannabinoid system, a name heavy and clinical, but the truth it carries is astonishing. Your body, from the crown of your head to the lining of your gut, is wired to respond to cannabis, and only cannabis, not alcohol, not caffeine, not nicotine, only this one plant. That is not an accident of biology. It is too precise, too intentional, like an ancient code written into the very fabric of human life. And when you look back at the oldest records of civilization, the same truth whispers through every age. In the Vedas of India, cannabis was named Vijaya, the conqueror of suffering, an herb that dissolved illusion and brought seekers closer to the eternal dance of Shiva. Across the deserts of Egypt, the priests of Thoth burned it in their temples, calling it the green messenger, a bridge between human sight and divine vision. And in the book of Exodus, hidden behind the mistranslation of an ancient Hebrew word, do you find instructions for the holy anointing oil, an oil scholars now know was infused with cannabis. Kings, prophets, and priests were not merely blessed with a symbolic mixture, they were literally activated by it. So what does this mean for us now? It means the sensations you might have dismissed as a simple high are not random at all. The softening of thought, the bending of time, the colors shifting at the edges of your perception, these are not tricks of the mind. They are signs that the veil is thinning, that your nervous system has recognized a sacred key and is opening a door you were always meant to step through. And here is the question many of you have quietly asked. Why is the human body designed with such perfect harmony for this plant? Perhaps it is not design in the way we imagine, but memory. Perhaps this relationship is older than any religion, older than the pyramids or the temples. Cannabis may not be a drug we discovered. It may be a teacher we have simply forgotten. Step into the silence of an Egyptian temple at night. The desert winds down, and torches flicker against walls carved with stories older than any kingdom we remember. The air is heavy with incense, not just smoke for the senses, but medicine for the soul. Priests of Thoth moved slowly through the chambers, carrying bowls of burning herbs that rose in spirals toward painted ceilings. And among those herbs was cannabis, the green messenger. As the smoke rose, the glyphs etched into stone seemed to glow as if alive, and those who breathed it in believed the eye of Horus was opening, a second sight awakening within them. For the Egyptians, this was not intoxication, it was communion. They weren't trying to escape reality, they were entering a higher one. Across the world, in India, the same plant found another life. Every year, during Shivaratri, devotees prepared a drink called Bhang, a blend of cannabis, milk, and spices. This was no casual refreshment. It was swallowed in sacred ceremony to dissolve the ego and to merge with the dance of Shiva. The bitterness of the plant, softened by sweetness, became a potion of surrender. In those hours, worshippers believed they were stepping beyond their small identities and entering the cosmic rhythm, where separation between human and divine vanished. The parallels are impossible to ignore. Egypt and India, separated by deserts and oceans, both used the plant not as a drug of leisure, but as a key to the sacred, and often it was combined with other botanicals, blue lotus, myrrh, and resins that carried prayers through smoke. These blends were not random, they were alchemical formulas, designed to shift consciousness carefully, like tuning an instrument before it plays its first note. To the ancients, cannabis was never meant to stand alone. It was part of a symphony of plant allies, each one guiding the seeker closer to the threshold of mystery. And here is where many of you have wondered. If smoking feels harsh, if the lungs reject the fire, what then? The answer lies in these older traditions. Tea, brewed gently, cannabis becomes less a blaze and more a tide, rising slowly, carrying you inward with patience instead of force. The Bhang of India shows us that the plant can be consumed in ways that honor the body's rhythm. A sip of tea can do what a blaze of smoke cannot. It lingers, it steadies, it whispers instead of shouts. For seekers dealing with anxiety, or those who long for meditation without turbulence, this path is not only safer, it is closer to the ancient way. Imagine yourself at the edge of a ritual circle, holding a warm cup instead of a burning pipe. The warmth travels down into your chest, and instead of a sudden rush, there is a gradual unfurling, like petals opening in the dark. This is how countless generations approached the plant with reverence, patience, and a desire not for entertainment, but for encounter. What modern culture branded as a pastime was, in truth, a passport to the sacred. The Egyptians carried it in smoke that lifted prayers to the gods. The Indians poured it into milk to dissolve the boundaries of self. Both knew what we are only beginning to remember. Cannabis was not designed to make us forget. It was meant to help us remember who we are. There was a time when cannabis was not controversial, not criminal, not whispered about in back alleys. It was celebrated openly, as a sacrament across cultures. In Egypt, smoke rose through temples. In India, bhang flowed in sacred cups. In the Middle East, it was woven into oils that anointed kings and prophets. For countless generations, the plant was not a vice, it was a bridge. And then came the silence. The same plant that once anointed priests was recast as a poison. The same smoke that carried prayers was turned into a cloud of suspicion. History was rewritten, not because the plant had changed, but because power had. The early church branded many ancient practices as heresy, seeking control not only over souls but over the gateways to inner knowledge. Governments later took that torch, shaping laws not around truth but around fear. And corporations, hungry for profit, painted cannabis as competition to their pharmaceuticals, their tobacco, their alcohol. The result was a caricature. The sacred teacher became a punchline. Stoner jokes spread through movies and media, until an entire generation saw cannabis not as a path to clarity, but as the symbol of laziness and escape. It was a narrative carefully crafted, because ridicule is a more powerful weapon than prohibition. Make people laugh at something, and you strip it of its dignity. But underneath the ridicule, the reality never disappeared. In quiet corners of culture, among Rastas chanting psalms, among mystics who refused to forget, the sacrament survived. It survived because truth has a way of outlasting propaganda. You can bury a seed, but you cannot stop it from sprouting. And when the 20th century declared a war on drugs, what it really declared was a war on perception. It was not only cannabis that was targeted, but the very right of human beings to explore the landscapes of their own consciousness. By criminalizing the plant, authorities were not protecting society, they were protecting their monopoly on meaning. If people could awaken on their own, if they could access clarity, connection, and inner vision, without permission, what need would they have for systems built on control? That is why this story still stirs anger, because behind the arrest, the propaganda, and the stigma lies a quiet truth. Something sacred was stolen, renamed, and hidden in plain sight. To recover it is not simply to challenge a law, but to reclaim a birthright. The outrage is real, but so is the hope. For every wall built to suppress this plant, there are voices rising to remember it. And remembering is the first act of justice. Not every doorway should be rushed through. The ancients knew that before you ever touched flame to leaf, you first had to prepare the body. Cannabis was never meant to be taken in chaos or distraction. It was meant to meet a rhythm. That rhythm was the breath. Without it, the plant is only half a key. With it, the lock opens smoothly, and what waits on the other side does not overwhelm, but invites. The Egyptians called it alignment. Yogis of India shaped entire sciences around it. And though we've dressed it in new language today, the practice is the same. Breath steadies the nervous system, slows the heart, and opens the inner ear of perception. Before ritual smoke ever reached the lungs, the seeker would spend time simply breathing, counting, allowing their body to fall into a harmony the plant could recognize. One of the most guarded patterns was the 7-breath activation. 7, the number of ascent, of completion. Each breath was not hurried, not shallow. You would inhale fully, hold just long enough for silence to bloom, and exhale until the body softened, and then again, 7 times. By the final round, the racing thoughts slowed, the tension in the chest released, and the body became something new, a temple, ready for incense. Only then would the plant be introduced, not as a drug to drown the system, but as a messenger, stepping into a house, already swept clean. Modern seekers have rediscovered echoes of this. Box breathing 4 counts in, 4, held, 6 out carries the same wisdom. It tells the heart to ease, tells the brain to unclench. Alternate nostril breathing, taken from pranayama, balances left and right, logic and intuition, until the mind no longer vibrates like a loose string, but hums in tune. These are not gimmicks, they are safeguards. For anyone who has felt their heart pound too fast, or their thoughts spiral during a session, these breaths are the anchor. They keep the experience from becoming a storm, and instead turn it into a tide you can ride. Imagine the difference. Without the breath, you spark the plant and feel the rush slam into you, uninvited, unpredictable. With the breath, you extend an invitation. The body is calm, the nervous system receptive, and the messenger steps into a house already waiting. What follows is not panic, but presence, not a bad trip, but a conversation. This is why the breath was never optional. It was the protocol. Priests, yogis, shamans, all of them knew that the human system is delicate. To open it without preparation is like opening a portal with no guard. But 7 steady breaths build the guard. They calm the waters before the boat pushes off. They ensure that when the plant speaks, you are able to listen. So the next time you think of cannabis as only the flame and the smoke, remember this. Its true power is only revealed when it arrives in harmony with your breath. Breath is the forgotten half of the key. And when both halves meet, the lock opens not into confusion, but into clarity. Every seeker who has walked this path knows the fear. You light the flame, and you breathe in, and instead of clarity, you are met with a sudden weight pressing down. Collars sharpen too much. The silence grows heavy, and a presence you cannot name begins to stir. People call it a bad trip. The ancients called it something else. The arrival of the shadow. This shadow is not an enemy sent to punish you. It is the part of yourself you have refused to see. Buried grief, unspoken guilt, the fears you've pushed aside to keep moving through life, all of them wait in silence. And cannabis has a way of lifting the veil that keeps them hidden. When those veils are torn back, the first sight can be terrifying. It feels like a demon standing in front of you. But look closer, and you realize it is carrying your own reflection. Cultures across the world understood this. Tibetan texts describe the bardo, the state between life and death, where terrifying deities appear. But the teaching is clear. They are not demons at all. They are mirrors of the mind. Ayahuasca traditions in the Amazon say the same. Drink the brew, and visions rise snakes, jaguars, spirits. To the unprepared, they are horrors. To the prepared, they are guides. The difference lies not in what appears, but in how you meet it. So how do you prepare? The ancients created containers, boundaries that made the journey safe. Salt was scattered at the threshold, marking a circle of protection. A single candle burned, anchoring the traveler in light. Chants filled the space, not to drown out fear, but to weave a rhythm that the mind could hold on to. And when the shadow came, the seeker did not run. They breathed. They asked, "Why are you here? What do you need to show me?" That question alone could turn a haunting into a lesson. Modern science might explain it differently. It might say the racing heartbeat, the panic, the sense of doom is the nervous system tipping into overload. But even here, the wisdom of ritual holds true. Grounding practices, pressing your feet to the earth, holding something solid in your hands, returning to the breath, remind the body it is safe. What feels like drowning becomes simply a wave, one you can ride until it passes. This is the real secret behind the so-called bad trip. It is not a mistake. It is an initiation. The fear is not there to destroy you, but to test you, to ask whether you are ready to see the part of yourself you keep locked away. When you stay, when you breathe, when you face it, the shadow often dissolves into something you never expected: clarity, release, even peace. Many who have faced it describe the same moment, tears flowing, laughter breaking through, the realization that the demon was only a teacher in disguise. That is why ritual matters. That is why intention matters. Without them, the plant can feel like chaos. With them, it becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, every fear has a face, but every face hides a gift. To meet the shadow is to step closer to healing, and healing, though it often begins in terror, ends in light. So if you ever find yourself trembling under its weight, remember this: you are not being punished, you are being invited. The shadow waits not to harm you, but to show you what wholeness really means. And in that moment, courage is the key that turns fear into freedom. If breath steadies the body, sound steadies the spirit. For as long as human beings have gathered in circles, sound has been the invisible thread that binds them together. Drums in the desert, chants in cathedrals, throat singing, echoing off Himalayan cliffs. Each of these carried the same unspoken knowledge. Vibration is a doorway, and when cannabis enters the body, that doorway swings wider than ever before. The ancients did not separate plant from sound. In Egyptian temples, the smoke was always accompanied by chanting. Each tone, each vowel, was believed to strike a resonance inside the body. Like plucking the string of an unseen instrument, the priests of Thoth spoke not only to the gods, but to the cells of their own bodies. The smoke opened the way, but the chant decided what came through. Travel east, and you find Tibetan monks filling mountains with throat, singing so low and resonant, it vibrates in the bones of those who listen. They believed these tones aligned the body with cosmic order, that the human frame itself could become a temple bell. And once again, when the plant was used, it did not bring chaos. It made those vibrations bloom inside the listener, amplifying their reach beyond the skin. In the cathedrals of Europe, Gregorian chants rose in haunting harmony. To the faithful, these were prayers. To the body, they were frequencies. Long, sustained notes weaving together, holding the mind in suspension. When coupled with sacred herbs, incense, resins, cannabis, where it was still hidden in ritual, the chants became more than song. They became scaffolding for the spirit, a lattice that carried perception upward and across the ocean. In the hands of Rastafarian communities, the drum took its place. The steady 1-2 heartbeat, rising in smoke-filled gatherings, entrained entire groups into the same rhythm. Entrainment is what scientists call it. Now, the phenomenon where bodies fall into sync with a beat. But for those who lived it, it was something simpler. Unity, cannabis in the lungs, drum in the air, hearts beating as one. Modern seekers often ask, what should I listen to? The answer is both simple and profound. Frequencies between 432 and 528 Hz are known to calm, to harmonize, to draw the mind inward rather than scattering it outward. These tones can be found woven into playlists, crafted into ambient tracks, or even hummed by your own voice. It does not need to be complicated. What matters is intention. Imagine your ritual, a candle lit, the air still, a breath taken, the smoke enters slowly, and as it does, you press play. A soft tone fills the room, not loud, but steady. Each vibration settles into your body, telling it to soften, to open, to release. And then, before the experience deepens, you whisper a single phrase, a short prayer, a question, even just one word of gratitude. That phrase rides the frequency, shaping the experience that follows. Because here is the secret. Cannabis is the door. Sound is what walks through it. Without sound, the door may open to confusion. With sound, it opens to clarity. With the right frequency, the plant does not scatter your thoughts. It aligns them, and when alignment comes, you are no longer lost in sensation. You are lifted by it. So if you are seeking higher consciousness, do not think only of the plant. Think of the soundscape you create around it. Choose tones that calm, words that guide, rhythms that steady. In that union, cannabis does not simply intoxicate, it orchestrates. It turns the noise of the world into music for the soul. Every tool is neutral until it meets the hands of its user. Fire can warm a home or burn it to the ground. Water can nourish the earth or drown it. Cannabis is no different. It does not carry morality inside its leaves. It carries amplification. Whatever you bring to it, it multiplies. If you bring chaos, you step into chaos. If you bring reverence, you step into revelation. This is why intention is the dividing line. Treat the plant like a toy, a quick escape from boredom, and you will eventually meet paranoia. Use it to numb, and it will numb you further. Chase the high, and the high will chase you in return. hollowing out the very sense of clarity you thought you had found. But approach it as a tool, as a partner in healing, and it will hold up a mirror that shows you both the wound and the way to mend it. Ancient rituals always began with purification, not because purity itself was the goal, but because clarity of mind and body was the ground where intention could take root. Fasting before ceremony was not punishment. It was a way of telling the body to quiet its hunger so the spirit could speak louder. Hours of silence before the ritual were not emptiness. They were tuning the inner instrument. Cleansing with water or smoke was not superstition. It was a way of stepping into sacred space with reverence, as though entering a temple. Imagine entering the ritual with no preparation. The plant hits. Your mind is still tangled in arguments, distractions, screens. The smoke does not clear those thoughts. It magnifies them. What was a small knot becomes a tightening rope. But when you arrive, cleansed, hungry but awake, silent but steady, grounded in gratitude, the plant amplifies that instead, the same key, the same lock, but an entirely different room opens. For those who seek guidance today, a simple checklist can become a shield. Create a circle of safety before you begin. Ask yourself, have I fasted, even lightly, so my body is not weighed down? Have I prepared the space with intention, clearing clutter, lighting a candle, perhaps laying down salt as a boundary? Have I chosen sound that guides me toward clarity instead of chaos? Have you said a question, a prayer, a single line of intention for the plant to amplify? With those steps, you are not walking blindly into a portal. You are stepping into a temple you have built with your own hands. The difference is everything. For some, this will mean the plant teaches through healing, easing anxiety, revealing truths, stitching together broken parts of the self. For others, it may mean clarity of vision, the sudden realization of what has been hiding in plain sight. Cannabis will not choose for you. It will only magnify what is already present. And so the choice is always yours. Distortion or direction, addiction or awakening. The line is thinner than smoke, but it is there. And intention is how you stay on the side that heals. So before the flame touches the leaf, pause. Remember that the plant does not come to save you or to trick you. It comes to reflect you. And when you meet it with reverence, when you choose healing over escape, what reflects back is not distortion. It is the beginning of truth. Not every secret dies with time. Some are buried deliberately, under layers of ridicule, denial, and official silence. During the Cold War, when the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a race for weapons and technology, another contest was quietly unfolding in the shadows, a race for the mind. The CIA poured millions into a program called Project Stargate, a classified series of experiments designed to test the limits of human perception, remote viewing, telepathy, the ability to see across distance and time without ever leaving the body. Most people, when they hear those words, imagine LSD-fueled chaos, wild hallucinations, or subjects broken by sensory overload. And yes, LSD was tested. It tore open perception, but too violently. It scattered the mind, left subjects reeling, unstable, unable to distinguish between vision and madness. What the files rarely mention, but whispers of testimony still suggest, is that cannabis was also used, not in heavy doses, not in the way popular culture imagines, but in carefully measured microdoses. The results startled even the researchers. Where LSD smashed open the doors of perception, cannabis seemed to tune them, subtle, precise, like adjusting the dial on a radio until the static fell away and a clear signal came through. Subjects reported images of distant places, descriptions of rooms they had never entered, flashes of events they could not have known. Some called it imagination, but when cross-checked, too many of the details lined up. Too many coincidences became impossible to dismiss. Imagine the implications. A plant growing in the soil, older than empires, able to shift human perception, not into chaos, but into clarity. A tool that required no lab, no government funding, no corporate patent, just intention, breath, and reverence to intelligence agencies. This was a weapon too unpredictable. To the powers that be, it was a threat too dangerous, not because it failed, but because it worked. And so the story was rewritten. LSD remained the headline. Cannabis was relegated to the shadows, repackaged as a joke, smeared as a vice, criminalized under the banner of the war on drugs. But if you look closely, you see the fingerprints of suppression. The war on drugs was never just about substances. It was about perception, freedom. If ordinary people could unlock clarity, intuition, even glimpses of expanded awareness with a plant. How would systems built on control survive? This is the forbidden secret tied to Thoth, the keeper of hidden knowledge, the scribe who taught that sound, rhythm, and plant medicine could open doors in the human spirit. The CIA did not invent this, they stumbled onto a truth civilizations had known for millennia. The difference was that the ancients used it for awakening, while the agencies feared it for liberation. When you see the ridicule, the harsh laws, the fear campaigns, remember this. They were not only about stopping people from smoking, they were about stopping people from seeing. Because perception, once free, cannot be chained again. And that is what makes cannabis more than a plant, more than a ritual. It is a teacher that reminds us freedom does not begin in governments or institutions. It begins in the mind. The files of Project Stargate may never tell the whole story, but the whispers are enough to suggest that somewhere, in those quiet experiments, cannabis revealed itself not as a fog, but as a lens. And the lens was too clear, too precise, too liberating for those who wished to keep humanity blind. So they buried it, they laughed at it, they called it a weed. But like every seed buried in darkness, it waits, and when it rises again, it carries with it not only healing, but the unsettling, undeniable truth. The plant works. If you want to know how a culture truly regarded a plant, you don't look at the propaganda of the present. You look at the words they carved into stone, the hymns they carried across centuries, the oils and incenses they used to anoint their kings and priests. And when you search those ancient sources, cannabis does not appear as a joke, nor as a criminal act. It appears as a sacrament. In the Vedas of India, among the oldest religious texts in human history, cannabis is called Vijaya. The word means victory, but not victory in war or conquest. It was the victory over suffering, over illusion, over the endless cycle of craving and despair. The Vedas describe cannabis as the herb of Shiva, the god whose dance dissolves the ego and opens the path to cosmic unity. During festivals like Shivaratri, devotees would drink Bhang, not to numb themselves, but to step closer to the truth. In their chants and hymns, cannabis was described as a companion on the journey inward, a reminder that liberation was not a distant idea, but something felt in the body, here and now. In Egypt, the story rhymes. Inscriptions and temple records speak of a green plant burned in ceremony, smoke rising like a bridge between human and divine. The priests of Thoth understood cannabis as more than medicine. It was a messenger. The green smoke was believed to awaken the eye of Horus, a symbol of second sight, of vision that could pierce the veil of ordinary perception. Imagine the temple halls, the glyphs painted on walls, torches flickering, and the air filled with resin and cannabis smoke. To those present, this was not entertainment. It was a rehearsal for eternity. Even in the Bible, hidden behind translation, cannabis makes its quiet appearance. In the book of Exodus, God instructs Moses to prepare a holy anointing oil. Among the ingredients, the Hebrew word kana bosom appears long mistranslated as calamus. Scholars now argue persuasively that this was, in fact, cannabis. And this oil was no small matter. It was used to consecrate priests, prophets, and kings. In other words, to mark those who were set apart, those chosen to carry the presence of the divine. If this reading is correct, then the very figures we hold as sacred in Judeo-Christian history were anointed not only with symbolic oil, but with a plant that altered consciousness, drawing them closer to the holy. What unites these traditions is not just the plant, but its purpose. In every case, cannabis was not used to escape reality, but to deepen it. It was a door inward, a sacrament to remind human beings of truths hidden in plain sight. And that is precisely why it threatened external power, because inward awakening cannot be controlled by kings, priests, or governments. If the divine spark can be touched through breath, smoke, and silence, then the monopoly on truth held by institutions begins to crumble. So it was buried, mistranslated, mocked, but the traces remain in India's hymns, in Egypt's temples, in the hidden corners of the Bible. Like a thread running through the world's spiritual memory, cannabis appears again and again as a companion to the seeker, a plant whose roots stretch not only into the soil, but into the soul. And this is the hook, the realization that echoes across time. Cannabis was never local, never marginal. It was global, a sacrament of humanity itself. The fact that it appears in the texts of India, Egypt, and Israel tells us something simple but profound. Long before borders and dogmas, long before prohibition, and propaganda, people knew. They knew this plant was a teacher, and they treated it as such. Today, as we rediscover what was hidden, the question is no longer whether cannabis was sacred. The evidence is too deep, too consistent. The question is whether we are ready to honor it again, not as a relic of the past, but as a living messenger, waiting for us to listen. All the stories, the history, the science, the myths, they lead to this moment. Knowledge is powerful, but it only becomes transformation when you put it into practice. Tonight, if you choose, you can step into a ritual that countless seekers before you have walked. A ritual designed not for escape, but for encounter, not to numb, but to awaken. Begin with the space itself. The ancients never treated their ceremonies casually, and neither should you. Clear the room of clutter, place a small dish of salt at the threshold, a gesture as old as time to mark the boundary between ordinary and sacred. Light a single candle and let it be your anchor. Its flame is both illumination and reminder, and above all, silence. The modern world, turn off the phone, shut the screens, set aside the noise. You are building a temple, and temples demand reverence. Then, before you touch the plant, you breathe. 7 slow, deliberate breaths. Inhale deeply, hold just long enough to feel stillness bloom. Then exhale until the body softens. 7 times, not rushed, not mechanical, but intentional. Let the nervous system shift. Let the heart find its rhythm. This is the forgotten key. By the 7th breath, your body is no longer restless. It is ready. Now comes the plant. Not in excess, not in recklessness, but in microdose, just enough to open the door, not so much that you are swept away by the tide. Think of it not as intoxication, but as invitation. As the smoke or sip enters, allow yourself to remain steady in breath, steady in presence. In the background, let soft music at 432 Hz or 528 Hz rise gently. These tones are not decoration. They are the broom that sweeps the path clean. They keep the channel open, guiding what comes through. At the height of the ritual, ask a single question. What do I need to see? Not what you want, not what you demand, but what you need. Hold that question lightly and wait. The plant does not always answer with visions or words. Sometimes it answers with silence, sometimes with memory, sometimes with the sudden release of a truth you've carried too long. Trust the form it takes. When the experience softens, seal it. Take out a journal and write, not with the goal of perfection, but with the urgency of capturing what is still warm. Insights fade like embers unless you gather them. Put them on the page, your questions, your answers, even your confusion. This is how you carry the ritual into the morning, how you make it more than a fleeting high. And close with gratitude, whisper thanks to the plant, to the breath, to the silence, to yourself, for having the courage to enter. Gratitude is the lock that keeps the door you opened from swinging wildly. It closes the circle, grounds you back in your body, and ensures that what you took with you was gift, not residue. For those carrying anxiety, trauma, or sleeplessness, this ritual offers not danger, but safety if approached with respect. The breath calms the nerves, the microdose prevents overwhelm, the sound guides the mind, the journal seals the wisdom. Step by step, each element becomes protection, not prison. So tonight, if you are ready, prepare the space, light the flame, breathe 7 times. Let the plant meet you as a teacher, not a toy. Ask your question, receive what comes, write it down, give thanks. This is how the ancients practiced. This is how you can practice still. And when you do, you will discover that the temple you entered was never out there. It has always been within you. Cannabis has always been more than a plant. Across temples, texts, and time, it was honored as a messenger, a bridge between who you were told to be and who you truly are. The rituals, the chants, the breaths, the silence, they all point back to one truth. Awakening does not come from theory or stories. It comes from practice. It comes from the courage to light the candle, breathe the 7 breaths, and meet the mirror within yourself. As you leave this journey tonight, remember, the sacred is not lost. It lives in you. The green messenger is not waiting in some distant past. It waits in your breath, in your intention, in the choice you make each time you approach the plant with reverence instead of recklessness. If this path resonates with you, join us. Subscribe, share your reflections, become part of a community of seekers who remember what was buried and are ready to practice what was forgotten. The temple has always been within you, and the key has always been in your hands. The only question left is whether you are ready to turn it.